We are continuing information on Roman numeral II of the Protestant Reformation with more information on Martin Luther. You can see here we're currently at the bottom of that first page of Roman numeral II's outline on number 4. And then when we're finished with number 4, we will move on to this next typed outline, which will finish up section 2 on Martin Luther. Okay, so again, make sure you have both of these outlines available to either take notes on or refer to when you are taking notes using the recorded PowerPoints. Remember we said at first the Pope ignored Martin Luther and then that's going to change? This is the moment where that is going to change. In 1520, Luther published his Theology of Reform. So this is definitely going to get the church's attention. You can see here all of the various beliefs that Luther is putting into his theology. The first one on your 4a says salvation could be achieved through faith alone. What Luther is doing with this statement is he is rejecting the good works as the means to salvation, which is the Catholic doctrine. You see, Catholics believe salvation through living life according to Christian beliefs and participating in the practices of the church, which are good works. So Catholics practice faith and good works as a means for salvation, whereas Luther is basically saying it's justification by faith, that salvation cannot be earned and a good life is the fruit of faith. So he's saying that salvation should be achieved through faith alone, whereas the Catholics are saying it's faith and good works in order to achieve salvation. So a little bit of a difference there between the two doctrines. Luther is also stating that he believes the Bible was the ultimate authority. So what's in the Bible should be followed to a T and not strayed away from at all, which is what some believe the church was doing. They weren't always teaching according to the Bible. Again, that was a criticism. Another one of Lutherans' mentioning of reform is he says that baptism and communion were the only valid sacraments. Now, again, you have to understand that he is rejecting 5 of the 7. Catholic Church believes in 7. He is basically saying the only 2 that can be found in the Bible are baptism and communion. So Luther agrees with the Catholic Church with baptism, not exactly all parts of baptism. Like, for example, Luther says you can get baptized at any age. You don't have to be an infant, whereas with the Catholic Church, you are baptized at infancy. Okay? Now, Luther doesn't reject infant baptism, but he just believes that you can be baptized at any age. And then communion's the most controversial when it comes to what the Catholics and Luther believed. Luther rejected what's called transubstantiation. And I'm going to take a minute to make sure that you write down what that means. Transubstantiation means that the bread and wine retain outward appearances. The bread and wine retain outward appearances, but are transformed into the body and blood of Christ. Now remember, this is talking about the Lord's Supper. When the Catholic Church, every one of their services, they perform the Lord's Supper, which is communion. And so the Catholics believe that the bread and wine retain outward appearances, but they are transformed into the body and blood of Christ. Whereas Luther advocates consubstantiation, also called the real presence. So what Luther says is that the bread and wine did not change. So again, you're writing this down. The bread and wine did not change, but the spiritual presence of Christ is in the bread and wine, hence that real presence. I'm going to repeat the last part. The spiritual presence of Christ is in the bread and wine. That's what he's calling the real presence. So again, you can see that Luther differs with the Catholic Church when it comes to the sacrament of communion, which deals with the bread and the wine. Another one of his beliefs is that the church consisted of a priesthood of all believers, not a hierarchical structure. So what Luther means by this is that the church consists of the entire community, okay? That everyone in the eyes of God are all the same. That there shouldn't be people who are treated better than others in the church. So this whole priesthood of believers, in the eyes of God, all people are basically leaders within the church. You shouldn't have this hierarchy of the Pope at the top, then the cardinals, then the archbishops. Luther says the church needs to get rid of that. Okay? He's also, with this priesthood of all believers, he's saying that the Bible contains all that is needed for a person to lead a Christian life. And so you don't need these individual leaders like a bishop and a priest to interpret scripture for you. That we are not subject to the church's interpretation. We should be able to interpret it on our own. So again, that's something that Luther believes, and he's hoping that the church will consider making those changes. Something else he wants the church to address and change is, of course, the sale of indulgences and simony, basically selling those office positions to people who are not qualified. So he wants the church to get rid of those practices. He encouraged German princes to reform the church in their states, and he rejected the monastic tenets of poverty, chastity, and obedience. Monastic just meaning the monks, their vows. And these are vows that he took as a monk. And he's basically saying, look, I don't believe that if you are a leader of the church, you should live a life of poverty. You should live a life without getting married and having a wife and child. And being completely obedient to the church. He's saying you could still be a church leader and not take those specific vows. So we have just covered Luther's theology of reform and the specific changes that he is hoping the Catholic Church will put in place. Now, you can imagine when the Pope found out about this, how upset he was. So what was his actual reaction? Here it is. Pope Leo X in the year 1520 sent a papal bull, which is basically a formal document telling someone, these are instructions from the Pope. What that papal bull said was that Martin Luther was excommunicated by the Catholic Church, which means he is completely cut off. He is no longer a monk or a member of the Catholic Church. Well, Martin Luther, when he got that papal bull and he read what the church was basically telling him, his reaction was throwing it into the fire. So that's what he thought of the Pope and the Catholic Church. Sorry about that. I didn't mean to switch it over just yet. Now, remember I told you that there is no Germany yet. And a lot of this is taking place in German states, which make up the Holy Roman Empire. So I wanted to mention that at this time, the Holy Roman Emperor, who was Charles V, made a promise that before his election as Holy Roman Emperor, he would not allow anyone in his empire to be excommunicated unless there was a fair trial. So he finds out about what Luther has done and what the Pope is saying about Luther, and he basically says, all right, I'm a man of my word, and we have to treat this man fairly and give him a trial. So the famous tribunal of the Holy Roman Empire that will take a look at whether or not Martin Luther truly will be excommunicated is known as the Diet of Worms. You pronounce the W with a V. So for the what? It's a tribunal of the Holy Roman Empire with power to outlaw and sentence execution. So Charles V basically has given Luther safe passage to this meeting in the town of Worms. Diet stands for meeting in German, and Worms is the town. And so Luther is granted that safe passage to the meeting and not going to be arrested, okay? Because obviously this trial, this meeting is to determine, his fate. So for the what happened on your little b for number 6, Charles V demands that Luther recant his writings, which basically means he needs to take them all back. And you can imagine Luther's reaction to that was he refused. He wanted someone to specifically show him where in the Bible he was wrong about some of the things that he was saying. So basically, the last words that come out of Luther's mouth in this meeting is this famous quote that I also want you to put under the little b on your outline. Here I stand, I cannot do otherwise. These are the last words of Martin Luther as he stands before this tribunal. And he's basically telling the Holy Roman Emperor, I've done everything I can do. There is no more than I can say. The way that this tribunal works, Martin Luther is allowed to leave and return back to his hometown of Wittenberg while he awaits some type of announcement from the Holy Roman Emperor. And that announcement is going to be known as the Edict of Worms. So you're putting this under your C where it says results. So what the Holy Roman Emperor has declared is that Luther is an outlaw. He has been outlawed as a heretic. Remember, heretic is someone who goes against the teachings of the church. Edict is just the German word for announcement or proclamation. And then again, this was issued in the town of Worms, where that tribunal was held. So what this means for Luther is he is a wanted man, okay? And the way the outlaw worked is you were basically deemed an outlaw for an entire year. And if you are not captured within that year, then that outlaw status goes away. So luckily for Luther, he will be kidnapped by Frederick of Saxony and taken to his castle where he will be protected and Luther's allowed to continue to write. So for 1 year, Luther's got to be in hiding until this outlaw status is basically null and void. We see that during this time, he will translate the Bible into the German vernacular, and that was in the year 1523, so that more people will be able to read and interpret the Bible in the German states. This, of course, served to democratize religion, as any literate German now had access to Scripture. So again, it's going to allow the common man to participate and be able to read the Bible. The last part of section 2 is the Confessions of Augsburg. They were written by Philip Melanchthon, and it is an attempt at a compromise between the Lutheran and Catholic princes, but this attempt failed. We also know it becomes the official statement of the Lutheran Church. So we know this was an attempted compromise of religious faith to unite the Lutheran and Catholic princes, but the